What's up everyone, it's Dakota and welcome back to another Modern video, and today we are kind of circling around some of the top decks that are performing in Modern currently. We went over a new one last week in the Kragan Wick Burn slash Reanimator deck, so if that sounds even remotely interesting to you, go ahead and check that video out, of course, after you're done watching this one. And if you're interested in supporting any of my content, whether it's the Modern stuff, Pioneer, streams, any of that sort of stuff, go ahead, subscribe, ring notification bell so you know when videos get posted. Follow the links in the description to the Discord server and to my Twitch channel as well, and throw me a follow over there so you know when I go live. But today we're going to be taking a look at Mono White Hammer for the Modern format, a deck that has persisted. It started out as a meme, famously, I believe, like Saffron Olive like played this, and it was started out as like red white. You had ways to like just automatically equip the hammer because, as you can see here, the Colossus Hammer has an 8 mana cost to equip, but it's just 1 mana to play it. So the deck has always tried to find ways to either add some resiliency and also just put the hammer onto a creature as efficiently as possible, obviously skipping the 8 mana cost to equip it. So how the heck is this deck doing this? How does it even operate, even if you haven't really seen it, which I would be very surprised if you haven't. So kind of in this iteration of Hammer, is strictly mono white. You've seen like them splashing black for like Thoughtseize back in like the Lurrus days to let you be a little bit more resilient to like the removal to shatter effects and stuff. You're able to cast hammers, cast some of your creatures from like the graveyard, stuff like that. With Lurrus, you'd see like blue getting to play like counter spells and like the reality chips, so it could just play off the top of its own deck and have like a pseudo way of drawing cards. This one is going full mono white. So of course, like some of the key cards in this deck, you have Sigardazade, which allows you to cast auras and equipments as though they had flash, and when an equipment enters the battlefield under your control, you may attach it to another creature. And obviously, our best equipment being Hammer, giving a creature +10/+10, and it loses flying. Uh, enables some pretty interesting things. So essentially, it is a turn 2 kill straight up with an Inkmoth Nexus. If you play like a Nexus on turn 1, and play like an Ornithopter, use the Inkmoth Nexus to play like a Springleaf Drum or something like that, and then play like a Sigardazade off of that. You can then activate the Inkmoth Nexus and attack with it, and then use like your other land drop to cast a hammer and put it on Inkmoth Nexus and just 11 infect your opponent and win the game that way. With 2 hammers and an Ornithopter, you can just win. There'll be some tricks that we'll go over here in a minute, because we do have a new card from the Lord of the Rings set, Forge Anew, for 3 mana. It's an enchantment. When it enters the battlefield, you return target equipment card from your graveyard to the battlefield, essentially getting you to rebuy like one of your hammers, maybe a Shadow Spear, a Cauldron if your opponent manages to get rid of it, things like that. As long as your turn, you can activate equip abilities anytime that you could cast an instant, and then you can pay 0 rather than pay the equip cost of the first equip ability you activate on each of your turns. So this is kind of a way, like one of the downsides to Sigardazade is that if your opponent responded to the trigger of getting to equip a hammer to one of your creatures, they could just kill the creature, and you have a hammer sitting in play, and you're kind of waiting for like a Pure Steel Paladin to be able to equip it for free. Where now with Forge Anew, if your opponent just manages to kill, like, say, your one hammer, Forge Anew just gets to, you play it, brings it right back into the battlefield, and then you can equip for 0 at any time on your turn, and then you can also do it at instant speed. So some of the tricks and stuff that we're going to talk about kind of involves like playing like Ornithopter and like Inkmoth Nexus, because like the downside or whatever of Colossus Hammer, aside from its 8 cost to equip, is the fact that the creature loses flying. So it makes it a little bit easier to block, but of course, like its huge is probably going to beat down just about any creature it plays. However, because Sigardazade and Forge Anew allow you to essentially equip a hammer at instant speed, both in different ways, you can have this Ornithopter essentially be unblockable. So you attack with the Ornithopter. You go to blocks. If your opponent doesn't have any reach creatures or flying creatures, they can't block the Ornithopter. So they say no blocks, and in the blocking step, but before damage, thanks to like Scar's Aid, you're able to flash in Colossus Hammer and put it on your Ornithopter, and your opponent obviously doesn't get another chance to like try and block now that they magically can block it. Essentially giving your Ornithopter like unblockable by keeping the flying around until the last possible minute. Forge Anew having essentially the same trick, although in that scenario, if you have two hammers in hand with Sigarda's Aid, you're able to just auto-equip and win the game. Forge Anew, your hammer already has to be in play, and you can only do it once. But getting to just, 10 your opponent with an Ornithopter at instant speed is pretty good, and again, kind of puts them in this situation where they're going to have to block the Ornithopter constantly. And if you ever just draw like a Shadow Spear, which gives your creature +1/+1 trample and lifelink, they're going to be in pretty big trouble. This deck kind of does snowball once a equipped creature with a creature equipped with hammer like hits you, it's game over. Whether or not like actually game over, it's very very hard when they just kind of get to put this constant pressure on you. Any additional hammers mean that you acquire additional creatures just to block, more removal spells and stuff. And really, like these creatures are just so like low impact in the grand scheme of things. I mean, you're playing like some amount of Giver runes to give your creatures protection, which makes it even harder for your removal to kill it. Playing a Surge of Salvation to give you and your permanents hexproof, and then also like messing up combat, can be pretty bad for your opponent. But really, like Surge of Salvation, just being able to protect all of your permanents and you, rather than one permanent with the Blacksmith skill that we would see, in previous iterations of this deck. You have cards like Gingerbrute, which can make themselves unblockable except by creatures with haste, which there only being like a few creatures that really actually gain haste in modern or just have haste in modern, so this is virtually unblockable. You have Esper Sentinel, of course, becoming a staple of this deck. Just one white, forcing your opponent to pay X, where X is its power for their first non-creature spell each turn, and if they don't, you get to draw a card, which of course is very good. And in a deck that wants as many resources as possible, like 19 lands, with 4 of them being these double face cards, which we'll get to here in a minute why it's playing this card, you're always essentially going to be very likely to draw some kind of spell, and again, like we have the Surge of Salvations, you have Stoneforge Mystics to go get, so you're like a Colossus Hammer, or go just get a Cauldron Complete and start bashing your opponent in. You have Pure Steel Paladins, which is going to allow you to draw more cards from your equipment, and then also equip for 0 as many times as you want, of course, at sorcery speed, unless you just have this Forge Anew, then, you know, it's essentially a combo with Pure Steel Paladin where like you can activate equip spell or equipment at instant speed for 0, uh, as long as Forge Anew and Pure Steel Paladin are play, and it's your turn. So kind of a new addition, and this has kind of gotten a while to get to it, but makes total sense. Solitude is a new addition to this deck, where obviously for 5 mana 3/2 with lifelink and flash, when it enters the battlefield, exile up to one other target creature, and that creature's controller gains life equal to its power. So Solitude demands that you have white cards, but of course, we have these paradise, we have a decent amount of artifacts, you have some of these lands and stuff. You have 4 Ornithopter, you have a Gingerbrute, and things like that. And you really don't want to pitch like the Sigarda's Aid and Forge Anew and stuff. So the deck is playing 4 Emeria's Call. So it gets to add more white cards to its deck. It gets to cut some like the fluff at like in the mana base, just some of the extra lands, where this gets to play it, and it can easily circumvent the 3 life to have it come into play untapped, and it's a white card to pitch to Solitude when you need it, and of course helps you eventually cast a Solitude if the game ever gets to that point. So definitely a neat innovation to this deck that we have not seen, and of course working very well because this deck was 8-1 in the NRG series just this past weekend. And a lot of the stuff is like kind of normal for the most part. I mean, 10 planes in the deck, you play a mono white. You have like Horizon Canopy and Sunbaked Canyon just to draw additional cards, but they're kind of like end up dinging you and dealing you points of damage. But, you know, again, the important thing is they give you a card later. Urza Saga gives you some big constructs to play, and then eventually getting to top it off with like a Shadow Spear, or just getting another like Colossus Hammer, and then finding a way to equip it, and just end up beating your opponent and probably winning the game from that point. The sideboard, you have like Mana Tithe, because Mana Tithing people is fun and actually comes up when your opponent, in an efficient format like Modern, where, you know, they're wanting to tap out and use their mana on every turn. Like, you can Mana Tithe a pretty important spell, you know, if need be. Most people don't really expect it. I mean, it's kind of a gotcha, you know, and it does feel bad, and kind of like the mind games you get to play with your opponent. This could be like a video all on itself. Like, you get Mana Tithe once, it's on your mind for like the rest of game 2 and all of game 3, where it kind of forces you to play off curve, where like this deck will punish you for trying to, you know, wait for inopportune times to play around something. It's like you need to answer these now, and sometimes Mana Tithe just gets you. Pithing Needle, tutorable by the Urza Saga, just a good, just kind of like a good one up to have. I remember when like Urza Saga first came out, Pithing Needle was like a card everyone just played in the main board, because you could just randomly get people. They're just like, yeah, sure, go get your thing. You needle like their fetch lands and stuff, and then, you know, they're just kind of blown out. Surge of Salvation, more protection against like all the targeted removal. Of course, again, backed up like with something like Mana Tithe or whatever. It's just like really, really hard to mess with. Drannith Magistrate, your opponents can't cast spells from anywhere other than their hands. This is really good against the Cascade decks because obviously they cast the card from exile, not their hand. Orvar for the 4-color and 5-color creativity decks, and more Solitudes just for more of that removal that the deck seemingly lacks, you know, because again, like, its creatures usually are winning combat after getting suited up with like a hammer. Even just having to deal with Cauldron Complete or like tokens from Urza Saga is pretty hard to deal with. But, you know, having a creature that eventually you could come down and maybe like equip on top of just being removal for like the mirrors for, you know, the 4 and 5-color matchups and things like that is really nice. And that's Mono White Hammer for the modern format. Always an interesting deck. Doesn't, I mean, for, you know, content's sake, doesn't necessarily perform well for me, but it is a very powerful deck. It is one of the few decks that can truly like win the game on turn 2, even like turn 3 with like protection on protection backup is just insane. And, you know, it definitely can give your opponents problems. And when playing against like inexperienced players, or players maybe not like familiar with how the deck works, or just not really thinking about it too much, players playing on autopilot, like, you just get them with this. Or like if they try to use damage-based removal to kill one of your things, and you just get to essentially equip a hammer for free rather than, you know, having to have a second hammer or have to have a Surge of Salvation and whatnot. Things like that. And even when people do know how to play against the hammer deck, it's still very difficult because you kind of walk this tightrope to where like you could just die out of nowhere, and really sometimes not to a fault of your own. You could just end up losing the game if you're not prepared. So that's going to do it for me in this video. I hope you all enjoyed. Of course, again, if you want to support me and my content, please leave a like on the video, subscribe to the channel, and ring the notification bell as well. It's following the links in the description to check out the deck if you want to check out the deck on Goldfish. If you want to follow me on Twitch, go ahead and do so with that link, and join the Discord server as well. That's going to do it for me. I hope you all enjoyed, and I hope to see you all in the next video.